The night was quiet except for the soft sound of a piano coming from a small cafe on the corner of an old street. Inside, a man sat at a worn-out piano, his fingers moving with care and emotion. His name was Evan, a single father trying to survive one day at a time. He wasn't famous, but the way he played made people stop and listen. His music carried feelings, not fame. Each note told a story of love, loss, and hope outside the cafe. The city lights flickered on wet pavement. It had just rained, and the air smelled like coffee and memories. Evan's little daughter, Lila, sat near the piano. Her hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and she clutched a small stuffed bear missing one ear. She watched her father play with wide eyes full of pride. She didn't understand all the grown-up problems, but she knew one thing clearly. Her father's music made people smile. Evan looked at Lila between songs and smiled softly. Every time he saw her, he found strength to keep playing. He didn't play for applause, he played for rent, for food, for school shoes, and sometimes just to keep his heart from breaking. There was a sadness in his eyes, but when he touched the keys, that sadness turned into something beautiful. The cafe owner, Mr. Brown, liked Evan. He often gave him free coffee and let Lila have warm milk. "You've got magic in those hands, Evan," he said one night. "But magic doesn't pay the bills." Evan smiled politely. He knew it was true. After losing his wife in an accident 3 years ago, life had been a daily fight. He worked at a factory by day and played the piano by night. He wanted to give Lila the life her mother dreamed of. One chilly evening, as Evan played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a black luxury car stopped outside the cafe. Its headlights cut through the mist. A woman stepped out dressed in expensive clothes. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement. Her name was Isabella Hart, a billionaire known for her wealth, power, and cold heart. She had no reason to be in such a poor neighborhood, but something in the music had caught her attention. She stood by the door, listening. The sound of the piano was soft but full of soul. It reminded her of her late father, who used to play Chopin in their mansion when she was a child. Her expression softened for a moment, but then pride returned to her face. She walked in, her perfume filling the air. The few people inside turned to stare. She looked out of place and too elegant. Too distant, yet strangely curious. Evan didn't notice her at first. He was lost in the music when the last note faded. A light clap echoed in the room. It was Isabella. Her clap wasn't warm. It was sharp and almost mocking. "You play well," she said coldly, "for a man who plays in a place like this." Evan looked up, his expression calm but tired. "Thank you," he said softly. He didn't know who she was, but her voice carried the kind of arrogance only rich people had. Lila came running to him, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Daddy." "That was beautiful," she whispered. Isabella watched, slightly amused. "Your daughter thinks you're a star," she said with a small smirk. Evan simply smiled. "To her, I am." For a moment, silence filled the cafe again. Isabella's eyes landed on the old piano and scratched. Missing paint. One key slightly broken. "Do you know Chopin well?" she asked. Evan nodded. "I try to." She tilted her head, her tone sharp yet playful. "Then maybe you'd like a real challenge." Evan raised an eyebrow. Confused, Isabella walked closer, her heels tapping against the floor. "My father left me a mansion, and inside it, his piano, a rare inheritance untouched since his death," she said. Her lips curved into a faint, cruel smile. "Play Chopin on my inheritance, and if you can move me, every penny I own is yours." The cafe fell silent. Mr. Brown stopped cleaning glasses. And even Lila looked up with big eyes. It sounded like a joke. A rich woman mocking a poor man for her amusement. Evan looked at her, unsure if she was serious. "I don't play for money," he said slowly. "I play because I must," Isabella laughed. A cold, elegant laugh. "Then prove it," she said, turning toward the door. "Tomorrow evening. My driver will come for you, if you dare." She left as quickly as she had arrived, her car disappearing into the foggy night. Evan sat quietly, staring at the door long after she was gone. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, are you going to play for her?" she asked. Her voice was small but filled with trust. He looked at her, unsure what to say. "Maybe," he whispered, "if the music can open her heart, even a little." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. The sound of rain mixed with the memory of Isabella's challenge. He knew rich people loved to play games, but something about her eyes, lonely behind all that pride. stayed with him. Lila slept peacefully beside him, dreaming of music and warm lights. Evan looked at her and smiled sadly. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep down, he felt it. This was the beginning of something bigger than both of them. The next morning, as sunlight touched the old piano, Evan placed his hand on the keys. His fingers trembled slightly. "For you, Lila," he whispered, "and maybe for her too." Then he began to play again, letting the melody fill the small room with hope, like a promise waiting to unfold. The next evening arrived wrapped in gray clouds and restless wind. Evan stood by the cafe door, his old jacket buttoned up. Lila clung to his hand, her tiny fingers cold against his. He had not slept much. The strange challenge from the night before still echoed in his mind like an unfinished song. He didn't know if it was pride, curiosity, or desperation that made him agree, but something inside told him this performance would change everything. A long black car rolled to a stop in front of the cafe. The driver, a tall man in a dark suit, stepped out without a word. He opened the door, revealing a warm glow of light from inside. "Mr. Evan, Miss Hart is expecting you," he said calmly. Evan hesitated. He looked down at Lila, who smiled up at him. "You can do it, Daddy," she whispered. That single sentence gave him courage. He kissed her forehead and turned to Mr. Brown. "Take care of her while I'm gone," Mr. Brown nodded firmly. "Go make her proud, son." As the car moved through the city, the rain began again, light at first, then heavy. Tapping softly on the windows, Evan stared outside, watching the reflections of streetlights stretch across puddles like broken stars. He thought of Isabella Hart, the woman who had challenged him with a voice cold as marble. She didn't know the world he came from, the struggles he had faced, the nights he had gone hungry. To her, this was just entertainment. But to him, it was a test of dignity, a chance to prove that music could still touch hearts untouched by money. After nearly an hour, the car stopped before a massive iron gate. Beyond it stood a mansion that seemed older than time itself. Its walls were tall, covered in ivy, and its windows glowed faintly in the dark. The gates opened slowly with a heavy creak. The car entered, rolling down a long driveway lined with wet trees that looked like sentinels of the past. Evan stepped out, his shoes sinking into the damp gravel. The cold air carried the faint smell of roses and rain. The door opened before he could knock. A butler, stiff and silent, led him through a hall so grand it almost made him dizzy. Chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, and the marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Paintings of stern men and women lined the walls, ancestors of wealth and pride. But what caught his eye was the grand piano in the center of a dimly lit room. It was larger, older, and more elegant than any piano he had ever touched. And there she was, Isabella Hart. Standing by the window, her dress was black velvet, her hair pulled back perfectly. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "You came," she said, her tone calm, but her eyes showed a flicker of surprise. Evan nodded. "You invited me," he replied quietly. Isabella smiled faintly. "I didn't think you'd have the courage," she said. Evan looked at the piano, not her. "When music is all you have, courage is easy." She tilted her head, intrigued by his calmness. "You know the deal," she said, walking closer. "Play Chopin on this piano, the one my father left me. Play it well enough to move me, and I'll make you a rich man." Her voice carried both arrogance and pain, like someone hiding behind gold to forget grief. Evan stepped closer to the piano. His reflection shimmered on its polished surface. He placed his hand gently on the keys. The touch was colder, smoother, heavier than what he was used to. For a moment he closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He remembered his wife, her soft voice saying, "Don't play for perfection, Evan. Play for truth." He began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor flowed through the mansion like whispers of a forgotten dream. The sound was gentle yet strong, sorrowful yet hopeful. Isabella's lips parted slightly as she listened. The rain outside softened, as if the world itself was listening too. Evan poured his heart into every note. He didn't play to impress her, he played for Lila, for his wife, for every sleepless night. Every key he touched carried a piece of his story: hunger, love, and loss. His fingers trembled only when emotion took over. Isabella walked slowly around the piano, her eyes locked on him. There was something raw and real in his playing that she hadn't heard in years. Her father used to play this same piece, But never like this. This version carried pain. Not polish, heart, not habit. When the final note faded, silence filled the room like a heavy fog. Evan kept his hands on the piano for a moment before lifting them slowly. He looked up, waiting for her reaction. Isabella stood still, her eyes glistening though her face remained composed. She turned away quickly, hiding the single tear that escaped. "You're better than I expected," she said softly. "But not good enough to buy my heart." Evan gave a faint smile. "I wasn't trying to buy it," he replied. "Some hearts aren't for sale." Her breath caught for a moment. She hadn't expected such honesty. She walked toward the door. "You can go," she said, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. As Evan stepped out, the driver held the umbrella for him. Rain poured harder now. He looked back once through the glass windows of the mansion and saw Isabella still standing by the piano, her fingers touching the same keys he had just played. Back at the cafe, Lila was waiting, half asleep on a chair. When Evan entered, she ran into his arms. "Did you win, Daddy?" she asked sleepily. Evan smiled and kissed her forehead. "I didn't win money," he whispered, "but maybe I won something more important." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, but inside the cafe, the small piano waited warm and familiar. Evan sat down again and began to play, not for a challenge, but for the truth that music always carried, even in the hearts that pretended not to feel. The morning after the storm, a thin light spilled through the clouds like a soft promise. Evan woke early, his mind still echoing with the sound of the piano from the night before. That grand instrument had felt alive beneath his fingers, every note trembling with memory. He didn't know why, but something about that mansion had stayed with him. Not the wealth, not the challenge, but the feeling that his music had touched a part of Isabella's heart she didn't want anyone to see. He made breakfast for Lila, a simple meal of toast and jam. She sat across from him, swinging her legs happily. "Daddy," she asked, "was the lady nice?" Evan smiled faintly. "She was complicated," he said, "like a song that starts sad but doesn't know how to end." Lila tilted her head, not understanding, but giggled anyway. "Then maybe you should help her finish it," she said. Her words made him laugh softly. Out of the mouths of children came the simplest truths. Later that day, as Evan was cleaning tables at the cafe, a black car stopped outside again. The driver stepped in and handed him a small white envelope sealed with gold wax. Evan's hands froze. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter written in elegant handwriting. "Mr. Evan, I would like to invite you to my mansion once more. My father's piano needs your touch again. Isabella Hart." Evan's heart beat faster. He didn't know if it was excitement or confusion. Mr. Brown raised an eyebrow. "Seems like you impressed her more than she'll admit," he said. Evan nodded slowly. "Maybe she wants to test me again," he murmured. That evening, as Lila played outside in the rain puddles, Evan packed his worn-out music sheets, though he knew he wouldn't need them. Real music didn't come from paper. It came from the soul. When he arrived at the mansion, the gates opened silently this time. Isabella stood waiting near the piano room, dressed in a soft cream gown instead of her usual black. The air inside felt lighter, warmer. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, touching the piano's golden edges. "You came," she said softly, almost like a question rather than a statement. "You invited me," Evan replied with a calm smile. She hesitated before saying, "My father's piano. It hasn't sounded alive since he died." She motioned for him to sit. He approached the piano carefully, running his fingers along the smooth wood. "Your father loved music," he said gently. "I could feel it." Isabella looked down, her voice quiet. "He did. He used to play Chopin every morning. It was the only time he smiled." Evan began to play again. Slower this time. The melody filled the room with softness. It was Chopin's waltz in a minor, delicate and bittersweet. Isabella closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. She felt the weight of her father's memory pressing against her heart. For years she had buried that feeling under diamonds and business meetings, pretending not to miss him. But now the sound brought him back. Not the powerful businessman, but the man who used to hold her small hands on the keys and say, "Listen, Bella, music is love speaking without words." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. One slipped down her cheek and she quickly turned away. But Evan had already noticed his playing grew even softer, more tender, as if speaking directly to her pain. When the song ended, silence filled the space again. Isabella wiped her eyes and forced a faint smile. You make the piano sound like it's breathing again, she whispered. Maybe it missed being played, Evan said. Or maybe it missed being heard. Something inside her cracked. Not a visible break, but a quiet one, like a frozen lake starting to thaw. You talk like my father, she said. A hint of wonder in her voice, Evan smiled sadly. Maybe we both learned from loss. Isabella looked at him closely for the first time, not as a poor man, but as a person with stories written behind his eyes. Tell me, she said gently, who taught you to play like that? Evan's gaze dropped. My wife, he said softly. She was a pianist too. We met at a music school I could barely afford. She used to say every note should mean something, not just sound nice. Isabella's eyes softened. Where is she now? Evan took a slow breath. She passed away 3 years ago. A car accident, he said. The words came out calm, but his voice trembled slightly. Since then, it's been just me and Lila. For a moment, Isabella didn't know what to say. She felt a strange ache in her chest, guilt, sympathy and admiration tangled together. Your daughter? She asked quietly. Does she play too? Evan smiled. She hums, off-key but with heart. That made Isabella laugh softly for the first time. The sound was like a small window opening in a dark room. They talked for a while longer, about music, about childhood, about how people pretend to be fine when they aren't. The sun dipped lower outside, painting the walls gold. Finally, Isabella said, Would you teach me again? Her voice was shy, almost childlike. Evan nodded. If you promise to listen with your heart, not your pride. She sat beside him at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on the keys. He guided her fingers gently, showing her where to press. Their hands brushed, and both felt a strange, unspoken connection, not romance yet, but recognition. Two lonely souls who suddenly didn't feel so alone. The song they played together wasn't perfect. Some notes were missed, some too sharp. But there was life in it. Laughter, mistakes, warmth as they finished. Isabella smiled truly for the first time in years. Maybe this piano doesn't need to be perfect, she said. Maybe it just needs to be real. Evan nodded, his eyes kind, just like people. As he left that evening, the mansion didn't seem as cold. The same rain that once felt heavy now seemed gentle, like applause from the sky. Isabella stood by the window watching him walk away. She touched the piano one last time and whispered to herself, maybe the music isn't gone after all. And for the first time in a long time, she felt alive again. The next few days passed quietly, yet neither Isabella nor Evan could forget that evening. The way the music had filled the mansion, the way their hands had touched on the piano keys, it lingered like the echo of a dream. Isabella found herself walking through her father's old study more often, touching the books, staring at the faded photograph of him by the grand piano. For years, she had locked those memories away, but now, one street musician had somehow unlocked them again. Outside, autumn leaves painted the driveway in gold and red. The air was cool, crisp, and gentle. Evan came once more, this time without a formal invitation. He stood at the mansion gates holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that Lila had picked. The guard, now used to his visits, let him in with a quiet nod. When Isabella saw him standing at the door with flowers in his hand, she looked surprised. For you? He said simply, handing them to her. Actually, from my daughter. She said the house looked sad and might need something alive. Isabella smiled softly for the first time that day. Your daughter is wiser than most grown-ups I know, she said, placing the flowers in a glass vase near the piano. The colors brightened the room instantly. They sat down by the piano again. Isabella was no longer wearing her cold mask of arrogance. Today she looked calm, almost human. You've changed the house, Evan said quietly. It feels different now. She nodded. Maybe music is stronger than walls. He began to play again. A piece that wasn't Chopin this time. It was something he had composed himself. Soft, flowing with hints of sadness and hope. Isabella listened, and soon her eyes filled with tears she couldn't stop. She turned away, embarrassed. I don't know why I cry every time you play, she whispered. Evan didn't stop playing, his voice calm. Because music shows us what words can't. When the melody ended, Isabella stayed silent for a long moment, then spoke in a shaky voice. My father used to play that same kind of music. Gentle but full of pain. I never understood why he cried after finishing a song. Maybe now I do. Her gaze fell on the piano. her reflection shimmering faintly on its polished surface. He wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for the people he missed. Evan looked at her, and for the first time saw not the billionaire who mocked him, but a lonely daughter missing her father. "You loved him deeply," he said softly. Isabella nodded. "Yes, but I never told him enough. I thought he'd always be there." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "When he died, I stopped listening to music completely. It hurt too much." She leaned on the piano, her tears falling silently. Evan didn't try to comfort her with words. He simply played another song. This one slower, warmer, a melody like sunlight after rain. The notes wrapped around her like an embrace. Isabella closed her eyes and let the music wash away years of grief she had kept buried under pride. When the last chord faded, she looked up, her eyes red but shining. "How do you do that?" she asked. "How do you make pain sound beautiful?" Evan gave a small, knowing smile. "Because beauty is what pain becomes when you let it sing." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, not out of amusement, but relief. "You make everything sound poetic," she said. Evan shrugged gently. "Maybe because my life doesn't leave room for fancy things. Just honest ones." They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between people who understand each other's loneliness. The air between them felt warm, fragile, almost sacred. Isabella looked down at her hands and whispered, "I think my father would have liked you." Evan chuckled softly. "I would have liked him too." Just then, a light voice came from the doorway. "Daddy?" It was Lila, standing there shyly with her small backpack and raincoat. Mr. Brown had dropped her off after the cafe closed. Isabella turned in surprise. "You brought your daughter?" she asked. Evan looked a bit embarrassed. "She begged to come. She wanted to meet the lady with the big piano." Lila ran up to the piano with wide eyes. "Wow," she whispered, touching the keys. "It's so shiny." Isabella couldn't help but smile. "Would you like to try playing it?" she asked softly. Lila looked up at her father for permission. He nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Lila climbed onto the bench and pressed a few random keys. The sound clumsy but full of joy, she giggled. "It sounds like it's laughing." Isabella laughed too, a genuine melodic laugh that made the whole room feel alive. Evan watched quietly, his heart full after a while. Lila looked up and said innocently, "Miss Isabella, you look sad sometimes. My daddy says music makes sad people happy. You should play with us." The words hit Isabella like a gentle storm. She felt something melt inside her chest. "Maybe I will," she said softly, sitting beside Lila together. The three of them played, one professional, one learner, one child, yet the harmony between them was pure. When the song ended, Lila clapped her hands. "See? Now you're smiling," she said proudly. Isabella touched her cheek as if realizing for the first time that she was indeed smiling. As night fell, Evan prepared to leave. But Isabella stopped him at the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for the music, but for reminding me how to feel." Evan nodded. "Maybe you were never broken, Isabella. Just out of tune." She stood there, speechless. As he and Lila walked out into the night, the sound of their laughter faded down the driveway, but the warmth they left behind stayed. Isabella turned back toward the piano, running her fingers across the keys once more. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely in that giant house. The flowers Lila had brought seemed to bloom brighter under the soft lamplight, and as she played a single note, smiling through quiet tears, she whispered to herself, "Maybe music really can heal anything." Days turned into weeks, and something unspoken began to grow between Evan and Isabella. It wasn't romance yet, and it was deeper, quieter, something built on shared memories and the healing power of music. The mansion that once echoed with silence now sang again, every corner breathing with sound, laughter, and the soft footsteps of Lila running through its halls. For Isabella, those days felt like a forgotten dream she never wanted to end. But destiny, as always, had its own melody, one that played without warning. It began one cloudy afternoon when Isabella was in her father's old library, sorting through dusty folders and unopened boxes. The air smelled of old paper and faint perfume. She hadn't stepped into this room for years. It was too full of ghosts. Yet something compelled her to open the drawer of his old desk. Inside, beneath a pile of faded letters, she found an envelope sealed with a red stamp. Her name was written on it in her father's familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter read, My dearest Bella, if you ever find this, it means I am gone. There is something I must tell you about a student of mine. A young woman with a gift for the piano and a heart full of dreams. I secretly helped her study when her family could not afford it. Her name was Amelia Cross. She reminded me of you. Passionate, proud, and full of light. Take care of her if she ever comes your way. She deserves the world. Isabella froze. The name hit her like a thunderclap. Amelia Cross. The same name Evan had spoken of. His late wife, the mother of Lila. Her heart pounded. The room felt smaller, colder. She sank into a chair, the letter trembling in her hand. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her father, her beloved father, and had once helped Evan's wife, and now, years later, Evan had walked into her life not as a stranger, but as a thread connecting the past she never knew existed. That evening, when Evan arrived for their usual lesson, Isabella's face was pale. Her eyes distant, he noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then handed him the letter. His eyes widened as he read it. His hands began to shake slightly. Amelia. Your father knew her? Isabella nodded. He did more than know her. He was her mentor. Evan looked stunned. She spoke of a kind man who paid her tuition once when she couldn't afford it. She never told me his name. He looked up at Isabella, realization dawning slowly. That man was your father. Silence filled the room, thick with shock and something bittersweet. The piano between them suddenly felt like a bridge between two lifetimes. Isabella's voice was low when she spoke again. Maybe. This is why I was drawn to your music. It carried her spirit. My father's student. My father's memory. Her eyes glistened. Maybe this isn't a coincidence, Evan. Maybe it's fate, Evan smiled faintly, his expression both tender and sad. Maybe it is. But fate has a strange way of bringing people together through pain. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. I used to think people like you and me lived in different worlds, the rich and the poor. But maybe we've both been missing something money and music can't buy. Connection. For the first time, Isabella didn't hide her emotions. She cried openly. Not the elegant tears of a lady, but the raw tears of a daughter and a woman rediscovering her humanity. Evan reached out and held her hand, not as a gesture of comfort, but of truth. The evening passed quietly after that. Evan told her stories of Amelia, how she used to play Chopin until sunrise, how she taught Lila to hum before she could even walk. Isabella listened, smiling through tears. She must have been extraordinary, she whispered. She was, Evan said softly. And she would have liked you. The next morning, Isabella visited the old music school her father once funded. She stood in the empty hall where her father had taught students years ago. The walls were cracked, the piano old and dusty. But as she touched the keys, she imagined her father teaching Amelia there. Two souls linked by melody and hope. A quiet voice inside her said, continue what they started when she returned home. Evan and Lila were already there, waiting by the piano. Lila held a small drawing in her hand. It showed a big house, a piano and 3 smiling stick figures. This is us, she said proudly. Isabella laughed softly. You even drew the piano. Lila nodded. Because that's where everyone's happy. Isabella knelt down, her heart warm. Would you like to learn to play properly? She asked. Lila's eyes lit up. Really? You'll teach me? Isabella smiled. We'll all learn together. That night, under the golden glow of the chandelier, Isabella, Evan, and Lila sat side by side at the piano. They played simple notes, missing keys, laughing at mistakes. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was alive. The kind of music that came not from skill, but from love. As the last note faded, Isabella looked at Evan. Your wife once learned from my father, she said softly. Now your daughter is learning from me. It's like the music never stopped. It just found new hands. Evan looked at her, his eyes deep with emotion. Maybe that's what music really is, he said. A promise that never dies. The rain began outside again, soft and rhythmic like applause from the heavens. Isabella looked up at the ceiling and whispered to herself, Father, I kept my promise. That night, as the lights dimmed and the melody lingered in the air, none of them realized that this connection, born from a single letter and a piano, had changed their lives forever. And somewhere beyond the rain, the souls of Amelia and Isabella's father smiled, knowing their unfinished song had finally found its ending. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the mansion windows. Soft and golden, The air inside felt lighter now, filled with warmth instead of silence. Isabella walked through the halls in her robe, barefoot, humming a tune without realizing it. It had been years since she'd woken up with music in her mind instead of numbers and meetings. Something inside her had changed, something she couldn't name yet. Downstairs, Evan and Lila were already there. Evan was repairing a loose key on the piano while Lila sat nearby, drawing tiny musical notes on paper. "Good morning," Isabella greeted, her voice unusually gentle. Evan looked up with a smile. "Good morning, Miss Hart." She raised an eyebrow. "Isabella," she corrected. "I think we're past the formalities." He laughed softly. "All right then, Isabella, it is." Lila jumped up and ran to her. "Miss Isabella, I drew this for you." She handed over the drawing. It showed a grand piano with flowers around it and 3 stick figures holding hands. Isabella looked at it and felt her heart tighten. "It's beautiful," she whispered, kneeling to hug the child. "Thank you." Lila grinned. "You look happier now." Isabella smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." After breakfast, Evan prepared to leave for the cafe. He still played there in the evenings, even though Isabella had offered to pay him generously. "You don't have to do that anymore," she said. "You could stay here, teach, compose. Anything you want." Evan shook his head. "I can't stop doing what keeps me grounded. The cafe isn't just work, it's where I remember who I am." She admired that about him. His quiet strength, his refusal to be bought by comfort. When he left, Isabella sat at the piano. She tried to play alone, pressing each key carefully. But the melody didn't sound the same without him. She realized it wasn't just his music that touched her. It was him, his sincerity, his patience. The way he looked at the world through kindness instead of bitterness. Later that day, she decided to do something she hadn't done in years. Visit her company headquarters. The tall glass building in the city was her empire, but it felt cold now, sterile, lifeless. Her assistant was surprised to see her. "Miss Hart?" "You haven't been in for weeks," Isabella simply replied. "I've been listening instead of talking." The assistant blinked in confusion. Not understanding, she walked through the office halls, watching people rush around with tired faces, tapping keyboards, answering phones, chasing profits. For the first time, she saw what she had built. Success without soul, money without meaning. It used to make her proud. Now it just felt hollow. She returned to her car, rolling down the window as the city noises filled the air. Laughter, street musicians, children shouting. She realized she had lived above all of it, locked away in a golden cage. When she came home that evening, she found Lila playing softly on the piano, her small hands pressing random keys but creating something sweet and honest. "That's lovely," Isabella said. Lila smiled shyly. "I call it Rain Happy Song." Isabella sat beside her. "Can I join?" Together they created a small, silly tune that made both of them laugh. Evan entered quietly and watched them smiling. "Looks like I've been replaced," he teased. Isabella looked up, her eyes glowing. "We're just warming up for our teacher," he chuckled. Walking over to join them for the next hour, the mansion echoed with 3 different rhythms: a father's calm, a child's innocence, and a woman's rediscovered joy. After Lila went to sleep, the house fell into gentle silence again. Evan stayed by the piano, his hand resting on the keys. Isabella poured them both tea. "It's strange," she said softly. "For years I thought I had everything, but it feels like I'm only learning to live now." Evan nodded. "Sometimes we mistake noise for life, but real life is quiet, like music before it starts." She looked at him, her gaze lingering a little longer this time. There was something in his eyes, steady, kind, unguarded. "Evan," she said quietly, "do you ever think about starting over?" He hesitated. "Every day," he admitted. "But I never thought I'd have the chance." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. The air between them was charged, not just with attraction, but understanding before either could say more. Thunder rumbled outside. The rain began again, heavy and rhythmic. Evan smiled faintly. "Seems the rain follows us." Isabella laughed softly. "Or maybe it's our soundtrack." They moved closer to the piano and began to play together again. Not Chopin this time, but something spontaneous. Each note felt alive, electric, almost like a conversation without words. Isabella closed her eyes, letting the sound carry her. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. She was feeling. Truly feeling halfway through the song, the power flickered, and the room went dark except for the candles near the window. Their hands still moved in sync on the piano, the golden candlelight reflected in their eyes, turning the moment into something timeless. Evan's hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. The melody slowed, softening until it became just a whisper between them. When the last note faded, Isabella spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another desperate man chasing a rich woman's attention." Evan smiled faintly. "And now?" She looked down, blushing slightly. "Now I think you're the first person who ever saw me as human." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but something new had begun. The mansion's piano room smelled faintly of candle wax and roses. The same wildflowers that Lila had brought were now blooming fully. Isabella stood by the window watching Evan and Lila walk down the driveway toward the city. Her heart ached softly, not from sadness but from a strange, beautiful longing she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she whispered something she had never said aloud. "Come back soon." And though he didn't hear her, Evan turned slightly as if he had. He waved from the gate with that quiet smile of his. The sun broke through the clouds, and the piano inside the mansion seemed to glow under its light. It was no longer just an instrument. It had become the heartbeat of something new, a family beginning to form, a woman learning to feel, and a man teaching her that love, like music, can rise from silence and still find its song. The following week arrived with the warmth of spring. The sky stretched blue above the city, and sunlight streamed through the windows of Isabella's mansion like a blessing. The world outside seemed to hum with life. But inside Isabella's heart, a quiet confusion grew. She had everything money could buy, but now she longed for things that couldn't be bought. Laughter at breakfast, a small hand tugging hers, and the sound of Evan's piano filling her home. Every morning felt emptier without his music. She tried to play on her own, but the keys felt heavier somehow. The melodies sounded hollow, missing the warmth he brought. Even the flowers Lila had given her began to wilt slightly, as if the house missed him too. Isabella found herself walking to the piano room again and again, running her fingers across the keys just to remember the sound of his touch. One afternoon, she decided to visit the cafe where Evan performed. She arrived quietly, sitting near the back. Dressed simply in jeans and a soft white blouse, no one recognized her. She wasn't Isabella Hart, the billionaire here. She was just a woman listening to a man who played music that made her heart ache. Evan was on stage, eyes closed, lost in his performance. His fingers moved across the old keys with grace and emotion. Each note spoke of love and struggle, of memories too heavy to forget. And when he looked up, their eyes met across the small room. For a second, both froze, the world around them fading into silence. Then a smile tugged at his lips. Gentle, knowing after the show. She waited until the crowd thinned. Evan wiped his hands on a cloth, surprised but happy to see her. Didn't expect a billionaire in a cafe full of spilled coffee, he teased softly. Isabella laughed. Didn't expect a single dad to make me fall in love with Chopin all over again. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her cheeks flushed instantly. Evan's eyes widened slightly but softened. Maybe Chopin's not the only thing worth falling for, he said quietly. They walked outside together, the evening air cool and calm. The street lamps glowed softly, and laughter drifted from nearby diners. "I've been thinking," Isabella said, her tone careful but brave. "You once said you didn't play for money, you played for meaning." He nodded. "I remember." Then she continued, "How about letting me help you share that meaning with more people?" Evan frowned slightly. "You mean sponsorship?" Isabella shook her head. "No, not that," she said quickly. "I don't want to own your dream, I just want to help it grow." She paused, searching for the right words. "A music school." "Evan, one where children like Lila, who can't afford instruments or lessons, can come and learn for free." He stared at her, surprised. "You'd do that?" Isabella smiled gently. "Not as charity, but as a promise, to your wife, to my father, and to every note that deserves to be heard." For a long moment, Evan didn't speak. His eyes shimmered with gratitude and disbelief. "You have no idea what that would mean to me." "To Lila," he said softly. Isabella looked down. "I think I do." she whispered. Because it means something to me, too. In the days that followed, they worked together on the idea. They visited old buildings, met teachers, planned classes, and dreamed out loud. Evan was alive in a way she hadn't seen before. Passionate, smiling, hopeful. Lila followed them everywhere, her laughter echoing through dusty halls as they imagined turning each one into a place filled with music. But as the dream grew, so did Isabella's feelings. She tried to hide them, tried to remind herself that this was about music and kindness, not love. Yet every time she looked at Evan, the way he smiled at his daughter, the way he spoke with honesty, the way he saw the world, her heart betrayed her. One evening, after a long day of planning, they sat on the mansion balcony watching the sunset. The sky was painted in orange and gold. Lila had already fallen asleep on a couch nearby. Clutching her teddy bear, the soft sound of crickets filled the air. Isabella broke the silence first. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked. Evan looked at her, puzzled. "Of what?" "Of being strong," she said quietly. "Of carrying so much and pretending it's easy." Evan leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "All the time," he said. "But then I remember that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to keep playing even when the song hurts." She smiled faintly. "You always turn everything into music," he laughed softly. "It's the only language I truly speak." The sky darkened and a cool breeze brushed her hair. Evan looked at her, his gaze steady but tender. "You've changed, Isabella," he said. "You're not the woman I met that night." She looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe that's because you saw the woman I forgot I was." Their eyes met, the air between them heavy with emotion. For a moment, it felt as though the whole world had gone still. Then Isabella spoke, her words trembling. "Evan, if I tell you something, promise you won't laugh?" "I promise," he said. She took a deep breath. "You've made me believe in things I thought I'd lost. Music, kindness, family, even love." Evan's expression softened. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Then maybe we're both learning to love again," he said quietly. They sat in silence, hand in hand as the night deepened. The sound of the wind through the trees was soft. Like a lullaby inside, the piano waited, its keys glinting in the moonlight as if calling them to play one more time. Evan rose and extended his hand toward her. "One last song for the day?" he asked. Isabella smiled through the tears in her eyes. "Always." They walked to the piano and played together. Their hands moved in perfect harmony. The melody was simple, gentle, full of truth. It wasn't Chopin, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And as the final note faded into the quiet night, Isabella realized something powerful. The challenge she once gave him had brought her to this moment, not of victory or wealth, but of peace, and in that peace, she finally understood what her father meant all those years ago. Music is love speaking without words. The morning light slipped gently through the tall windows of the mansion, painting everything in gold. The air carried the soft scent of lilies, and the faint echo of piano keys still lingered from the night before. Isabella woke early, her heart light but restless. For weeks, she and Evan had worked side by side to open the music school, a dream that had grown from pain, love, and second chances. Today, that dream was finally coming true. She walked downstairs, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, and found Evan already there, dressed neatly but simple as always. Tuning the old piano, Lila sat cross-legged nearby, eating a slice of toast, humming a tune she had learned from him. Isabella smiled. "You two start every morning with music," she said. Evan looked up, grinning. "It's better than coffee," Lila giggled. "Miss Isabella, Daddy says when you play the piano, the house feels happy." Isabella bent down and kissed her forehead. "Then today the whole city will feel happy," she said. That day, they were to open the Heart Cross Music Foundation, named after both Isabella's father and Evan's late wife, Amelia Cross. It would be a place where children from poor families could come and learn music for free, where broken dreams could find their rhythm again. The building stood in the heart of the city, painted white with tall windows that let the sunlight flood in. Inside, rows of small pianos and violins waited for tiny hands to touch them for the first time. When they arrived, a small crowd had already gathered, parents, children, and journalists curious about the unlikely partnership between a billionaire and a street musician. Cameras flashed, microphones appeared. Isabella spoke first, her voice calm but full of feeling. "This school is not about money or power," she said. "It's about hope, about giving every child a song of their own." She looked at Evan and smiled softly, and it's proof that sometimes the most beautiful music begins in unexpected places. Evan stepped forward next, his voice steady but humble. "When life takes everything from you, it's easy to believe that your story is over," he said. "But sometimes if you listen closely, you'll hear a new melody waiting to begin." He looked at Lila, who beamed proudly. This place is for her, and for every child who dreams even when the world tells them not to. Applause filled the air, and when Evan sat down at the piano to play the first song, silence fell. His fingers moved across the keys like a soft river of emotion. The melody rose tender and full of gratitude. Isabella stood beside him, her eyes glistening. The music wrapped around everyone, making even strangers feel connected for a moment. As the last note faded, a gentle wind passed through the hall, carrying the sound into the streets outside. Children began clapping, some even crying without knowing why. And Isabella realized this wasn't just a performance, it was a promise. After the ceremony, the crowd thinned and the sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and amber. Evan and Isabella stood alone in the quiet hall, watching Lila run between the instruments. "She's so happy," Isabella whispered. "It feels like Amelia and my father are both here somehow." Evan nodded. "I think they'd be proud." She looked at him then. Really looked. The man who once played in a small cafe now stood in the building of his dreams, and yet he was still the same. Still humble, still kind. She took a breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Evan, there's something I've been wanting to tell you." He turned, eyes gentle, waiting. "I thought money could protect me from loneliness," she said softly. "But all it did was build walls. You broke them without even trying. You showed me what it means to be alive again." She paused, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You reminded me that love isn't about giving everything. It's about giving what's real." Evan's expression softened. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you reminded me that life doesn't end after loss. It begins again in new songs, new hands, new hearts." His hand reached for hers, warm and steady. For a moment, everything around them disappeared. The sound of the city, the echo of footsteps, the ticking clock, and all gone. Only the quiet beat of two hearts finding harmony remained. Then came a small voice behind them. "Daddy, Miss Isabella, are you going to dance?" Lila stood by the doorway, smiling brightly. They both laughed softly. Evan lifted her into his arms. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked. "Should we?" Lila nodded eagerly. "Music makes everything better." Evan set her down gently and walked to the piano. "Then let's give the day one last song," he said. Isabella joined him, sitting beside him on the bench. This time she played the first note, and he followed. Their hands moved together in perfect rhythm. The melody was new. It wasn't Chopin, it wasn't written on paper. It was born right there from their laughter, their pain, their healing. Lila twirled in the center of the room, her small feet tapping in rhythm, her giggles echoing through the hall. The music rose and fell, telling a story of two souls who had found each other in the ruins of grief, who had turned loss into light, and silence into song. As the final notes faded, Isabella rested her hand over his. "Evan," she whispered, "that first night when I told you to play Chopin for my inheritance, I thought I was testing you." She smiled softly. "But it was me who was being tested. I just didn't know it." He looked at her with a gentle smile. "And did you pass?" She laughed through her tears. "No," she said. "I learned instead." Outside, the city lights flickered to life, and the stars appeared one by one. Evan stood, walking to the window with Lila in his arms. "Look," he said, pointing at the sky. "Every star is like a song. Even when one fades, the others keep shining." Isabella joined them, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's keep shining too," she whispered. In that quiet moment, surrounded by music and love, they finally understood. The inheritance wasn't money. It wasn't the piano, it was the gift of connection, of courage, of second chances. The wind brushed softly through the open windows, carrying the sound of their laughter out into the night. And somewhere far beyond, among the stars and the echoes of forgotten melodies, two souls, Amelia and Isabella's father, smiled, their unfinished song finally complete.